Hey, it's Chris. Let's talk big games. Let's talk expensive games. Let's talk how to choose what you're going to spend your money on. Because if you haven't noticed, 2020, especially in 2021 as well, seems to be heavily campaign games. So, this particular video, what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk you through okay, this versus that. Oathsworn versus Primal the Awakening. Both of these games, a lot of hype. Both of these games, a lot of hotness. Both of these games, a lot of dinero. So, is it worth your money? What do you need to know about both these games going into them? Whether you should pick up Oathsworn on the secondary market when it comes out to backers later this year, whether you should be pledging for Primal the Awakening right now. Where do your own interests lie? Where do your own preferences lie? And how do these games differ but are also the same? Let's take a look. Now, first up, let's take a look just at Oathsworn if you're not familiar with what Oathsworn is. Oathsworn is from Shadowborn Games. They funded nearly $2 million on Kickstarter at the end of 2019. So you are already over a year out in this game. Now, the problem is, even though it says late pledge here, right now, you can't late pledge. The late pledge is closed. So if you're looking to get it at this point, even though it's not near delivery yet, you're going to have to either buy it from somebody else, their pledge right now, as is, or you're going to have to wait until it gets much closer to production because you know people will start selling things as the shipping starts to commence and also immediately after it delivers because a lot of the time in these bigger campaigns there is buyer's remorse. However, you need to be careful because especially around both of those times, people will often jack it for a premium. The main thing you need to know about this is, and part of the reason for the delay currently, is that it's a heavy miniature based game. And there are actually two versions of this game, the standee and the miniature. I opted for the standees, so my different pledge is going to be a little different. I sort of wish I did the miniatures now, but at the same time, I wasn't a fan of one of the ways they did it, so I'll make my peace with it. Anyway, so what do you need to know? You need to know that this is more of a campaign game. This is a lot of miniatures, a lot of cards, a lot of story, a lot of narrative, a lot of traveling around, more campaigning than Primal the Awakening is. And depending on how you feel about that, that may be exactly what you're looking for. It may be that you're looking for more of a pure battler that is more of Primal Awakening. This is definitely more of a sandbox type experience in the sense of the campaign as opposed to a linear progression that you see in Primal the Awakening, where you are going from one monster to the next monster to the next monster to the next monster. There is not a lot of variability when it comes to Primal, and we'll talk about that in a couple minutes. So you're getting a lot of stuff, obviously, with these price points. This is heavily hyped, like I said. It's stories, it's encounters, it's 1 to 4 players. Now, this is where one of the first big differences comes in. Oathsworn, you play 1 to 4 players, but it does not necessarily scale for less than 4 players as well as Primal does. Primal, you can play it a little bit easier in that sense. Oathsworn requires you to have 4 characters in your party. So if you're playing with 1 or 2 people, that is going to be more of a challenge. Now, they have ways of mitigating that by using the companion system that they talk about, which is a way of simplifying the characters so you don't have to keep track of as much and it's a little bit more streamlined. But for some people, you may want the full experience. And so this one may be harder in terms of the scaling when you have a different player count. Now, the one thing I'll say though is that they have made very clear with the variety of characters that they have in the free company, as they're called, that there are different levels of difficulty to play these characters, meaning all of these characters are not the same difficulty a la Spirit Island. Some of the spirits are more complex and require more coordination, more planning, and more strategy. Now, I'm not necessarily sure it's strategy as opposed to tactics with this game yet, but they definitely have a rating scale and the story campaign book that is out in the backer update section, they have them ranked 1-star to 5-star. So depending on how comfortable you feel, depending on how familiar you are with the game, you're given a little bit of that. Now, the biggest difference we have seen in Primal the Awakening so far is that the main difference is that you are able to customize your weapons and the scheme in which you use the weapons, but the characters themselves are all classless, essentially. They are all adaptable to whatever you want to do. So, would you rather have the clay and mold it yourself? Or would you rather have someone who already molded the clay into the exact right shape of the model? Is the model you want this one, or is it one of the other ones over on the shelf? Also, the characters here have ability cards and their own player boards. Now, the ability cards are relatively, unique, but they're just for them. Primal does that, but it does it with weapons instead of abilities. And so with Primal, you have a little bit more deck construction, meaning the weapon says you have to have this number of cards of green, this number of cards of yellow, this number of cards of blue, and this number of cards of red in your deck. But it is not static in the sense that you only have 15 ability cards. You only have 22 ability cards. So there is some difference in that ability to adapt to the circumstances necessarily. Now, the difference is that these ability cards of these characters here all have different features on them that you are choosing from and trying to pay at a different cost. So there is some variability within the cards themselves, but the cards, I believe, remain relatively static, and you're not necessarily getting a whole lot of new abilities later on. I could be wrong about that, but that's as far as I've interpreted. Like I mentioned, this is your encounter board. The main encounter board on Primal, as you can see on Primal, it is very much a completely different, unique mechanic, and they have gone with the circular, tactical nature where you are just in quadrants around the monster, as opposed to Oathsworn, where you really have a double-sided encounter board that is hex-based, or grid-based, I believe, actually, and you are going to be using more positioning in that way rather than which side of the monster you're on, as you see in Primal by encircling it. And the other thing, obviously, as I mentioned, is Oathsworn, these huge maps. This is narrative. This is traveling. This is navigation. This is story, narrative. That is a huge element of this. Primal is exactly what you see is what you get. I mean, you have a story of you guys are fighting monsters, trying to eliminate them from the land, but there's not this somehow complex, deep mystery or reasoning behind things. You go out there, you smash, you defeat, you upgrade, you go out there, rinse and repeat. And I'm not saying that as a bad thing, because I think both are amazing in their own right in that sense. But depending on what you're looking for, you may favor one over the other. If you want one that really features that heavily, or if you just really want, me grog, me smash, and do it in a very unique, tactically sound, but different mechanic in this sense. Both are completely different in how they interact in these battle systems than other games out there in the first place, which is why they have so much hype to begin with. These are not rehashes of previous games. The other thing that you need to know is that both do have the option for an instant battle mode. So if you just want to one-off this Vraxin here, or if you just want to one-off one of the bosses here, they have the ability to do that in each game. And so this is not something that you're just not going to be able to do by the fact that this is a campaign game. Now, this also, with Oathsworn, has some secrets in terms of the bosses and the miniatures, which I wish Primal had included more of, but I think part of the hype in Primal is you have to show people, what they're going to be paying for in terms of these huge freaking miniatures. And so there's more spoiler here by the sheer nature of that. They have gone their darndest to hide what is going to be in a lot of these encounters so that it has more of a KDM element of, wow, this is what's going on the first time. Holy crap, I'm going to have to do X, Y, or Z. But like I said, they both have the ability to, if you just want to fight one battle, you don't want to do a campaign, you don't want to, have the big story or the big adventure all linked together, you can have the ability to do that in both of these games. So if that is what you're looking for, both of these games will allow that. With these games and with this combat system, both of them do not have necessarily permadeath unless you want to include it as more of a hardcore variant. Both of them have modes that unless your characters all get knocked out, you do not lose. And the difference is that Oathsworn, I do not believe that they come back. You can play as companions if you have them, if you're scaled down, like I mentioned. But in Primal, you are limited in terms of the battle. There's only so many rounds. So this is not an endless drag-all fight. You have to really be targeted, systematic, and precise, more so probably in Primal, because you only have 10 rounds or you lose. You also get knocked out, you come back, but you're down for 2 rounds. So 2 out of 10 rounds right there, it's a significant chunk. Oathsworn, it's kill or be killed, in these battles, most of them. And so it's not time limited. So depending on how quick you want it to be or how pressured you want it to be, one may suit your needs more than the other. So let's talk specifically more about the battles. And you can see all the stretch goals here on Oathsworn as I'm scrolling, and all the heroes and all the other cards that you're getting along with them, and the daily unlocks and some of the monsters. And so let's talk about the monsters. Let's talk about the battle system in each of them right now. Oathsworn has much more of your typical battle system between the good guys and the enemies. Because you refresh, you're getting your energy anew to spend on your abilities and to do your turn. You have unlimited actions that you can take during your turn as long as you have the energy to pay for them. So that's one difference. Another difference is that with Oathsworn, it is good guys go, then bad guys go. And that is what we're typically used to in a lot of these games. And it has lasted the test of time because it is tried and true and it works really well. Whether it's bad guys first or good guys first. Now, Primal does something completely different. Primal takes these behavior cards, their stance cards, and their peril cards, and it says, I'm not going to have my select phase for my monsters. I am going to have just a generic overall battle phase where the heroes are allowed to go, but on the hero's turns, I am going to potentially react to the things that they are doing at the end of their turn, but also in the middle of the turn. So it is more battle-like. I think that has been often some of the big criticisms in games like even D&D. When you're role-playing, it is, I do something, you do something, I do something, you do something. And there is something, again, to be said about that because it works well. But I think this is innovative enough that I would not be surprised if we start to see things like this battle board, things like these combos that they're doing, the round mechanisms, the timing in that sense, start to eke out and see them in other future projects from designers and publishers who are interested at how this actually works and what makes it different from the other standard stuff that we have become so accustomed to. So don't be surprised if this is successful, as I would already say it is based on the day one funding, that other people are going to adapt it just like they did with Gloomhaven and other dungeon crawlers or other successful mechanisms across the board game scene. Now, as I mentioned, you've got a lot of cards in these decks. You've got a lot of things going on with all of these different cards that you have the ability to access to, and especially with the different elements in Primal. How does that differ in Oathsworn? In Oathsworn, you have much more of a static deck, like I mentioned. The staticness of that deck is going to be present, but it's going to be mostly focused on the abilities within it. As opposed to Awakening, when you have all of these different options, you're going to be customizing it. It really takes the deck building aspect of this game, as well as the comboing. There is a combo system where you have to manage the cards, not only to possibly react to what the monster may do by having enough cards down to defend yourself. You also need to combo the cards in the right sequence so that they interact with each other based on which way they're pointing and which color needs to be next to another color in order to maximize the abilities that are on these individual cards themselves. So there's more card interplay as opposed to the strategy of what ability you're using at what time depending on the tactical nature of where you are on the map. As well, going back to Oathsworn, Oathsworn very much has more of the D&D type leveling system with these cards, with these abilities, and with these traits. As opposed to Primal, where you do have the ability to level up, but it's more so in terms of what you're doing with your deck by the level of the things that you're forging in order to give you stronger abilities, in order to buy stronger abilities across the board, no matter what element it is. So especially taking advantage of the elemental resistances or weaknesses that you know potentially of the monsters upcoming in your fights. That all aside for a second, both of these projects, as you know at this point, are not available yet. Oathsworn is in its production stages. You'll probably have it by the end of the year. Primal, at this point, at the earliest, March 2022. Realistically, probably the end of 2022. So neither of these you will have in the next 6 months. So where are you going to spend your money? Now, with Primal launching today, you can see that the early bird gameplay all in is $290. And that gets you a 5th player expansion, a Frost expansion, Feather expansion, Venom expansion, and any stretch goals. How much value is going to be in there? How much is that all in actually going to get you is the question. Now, the other interesting thing is they specifically note here, take note of this, gameplay all in, which means you may end up seeing other expansions or other things like what Oathsworn did with some of these expansions, with the art book, with the terrain box, with a map pack, something along those sides of things that are not included in the gameplay only all in. So could it be even much higher than $290, especially before shipping? Absolutely. You could see easily another $100 in add-ons tacked on in there. So, and this is one of the bigger complaints right now, is Oathsworn also had a standee version, and for all the crap that people throw at Awakened Realms, they make their miniatures, for the most part, relatively optional as an added-on feature if you want that, and they allow you to get the game without them. Primal does not allow you to do that. Oathsworn did, $179 for the core pledge. For the collectors all-in, you're looking at, again, $300 for almost everything, including the non-gameplay. So that's a big difference, that you're getting a lot of this other stuff. Again, granted, partially you have these armory where you're unlocking the weapons to be able to exchange them as seen here on the video. So it's just depending on how much of that you want. Personally, this, I would have gone for the miniatures, but I'm not a big fan of having to swap these out to match what weapon I'm using. So it was an easy pass for me. But how many stretch goals, as you can see here on Oathsworn, that they added, are you going to end up with on Primal? Because this is a lot of stuff. Don't discount this. I'm not sure how much of this stuff is fake stretch goals on daily unlocks. You know, how much of this stuff was planned to go with it in the first place? I just have no idea at this point with a campaign like that. The other question is, how much of that are we going to see with this? You know, the 5th player expansion is nice. And you know, it's great, and you're getting a couple of these others, but what's the actual price of this? Because $290, and what is the core pledge? What, $170? So you're looking at a difference of $120. $120, 1, 2, 3, 4 expansions. That's $30 an expansion. Are these expansions going to be worth $30 a piece? It's too early to tell, especially if they do unlocks or stretch goals that tie into the expansions themselves, like Simon and Awakened Realms have done in the past. So value-wise, you're talking actually relatively similar. Now, I know people are sticker shock by this because they were just upfront. They threw all the expansions right there on the gameplay all in. They didn't drag it along like Simon does, or drag it along like Awakened Realms does. And so I give them credit for that, because somehow, apparently, that is much more palatable when people trickle it in and it slowly adds up, as opposed to just being upfront about it. So say what you will, but I give them kudos for, you know, the gumption for being willing to do this and see how the reaction is going to be gauged by backers. And so far, at the time of filming this, it's over $1 million. So clearly, people are not put off by that as much as the comment section and Reddit and some of the Board Game Geek forums are complaining about it. So it is what it is. The other big surprise is just the gameplay length. I'm going to do a whole dedicated video to the campaign itself, so we'll get to that later. But so there you go. That is a head-to-head comparison of two of the more hyped games in the last year and a half, including one literally today and one that is very much comparable to it in size, scope in most senses, as well as price point. So, in summary, you have Oathsworn, campaign, narrative, unique characters with their own unique abilities with a static deck, more of a sandbox type exploration, boss battler, but also quests and events. Versus on the other hand, you have Primal the Awakening. Primarily a boss battler only with the upgradable forge, weapons, deck building, deck construction, tactical hand management, card playing aspect. Has a campaign, but it's mostly just battles being strung along with upgrades in between. Which do you prefer? Which would you rather spend the $300 on if you're going to get it? Are you willing to spend $300 now? We're just through a pandemic. Have you saved up, or are you spent out at this point because you're sick of seeing the high miniature and campaign type style games? I am in right now for both of them. One is more than enough, but you can never have too many of these, as I've said elsewhere. So this is going to be very interesting. I think this is going to be the big test point for a lot of other campaigns as well. But overall, two very unique, different products. I feel like there is definitely a core for one. There is definitely a core group audience for the other. But I think this being the example, I think this is a Venn diagram situation where there is definitely a core group that overlaps and is interested in both, such as myself. So, which do I recommend? If you just want to play and just fight and battle and boom and one shot or multiple shot upgrades, you should go with Primal the Awakening. It's going to be more expensive for what it is because of all of the miniatures. The price point up front is just going to be straight there. If you want something longer, something campaignish, something more sandbox, something that you make your own character and you have the ability to adapt a unique character with the way you want to upgrade them, more D&D-esque, more other outside just than smash grab battle sort of scenarios, you're going to want to go with Oathsworn. No questions asked. Oathsworn is also the cheaper option, especially because they offer the non-miniature version. So you can save some money and still spend some money elsewhere. Frankly, you could get the standee version, and then you could get the core of Primal the Awakening. So something to consider. Let me know, what side of the fence do you lean on? Do you lean on one side, or are you... Why not both? So let me know what you think. Let me know what you'd like to see. I'd love to do some more of these comparisons in the future. So as always, it's been a pleasure. Thanks for being willing to listen to my rambling. Let's talk sometime. Stay classy. See you around.